Newsroom in New York, in color, this is the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite and Eric Severide in Washington, Daniel Shore in Washington, Stephen Rowan in Washington, Bill McLaughlin in Bonn, John Lawrence in Chicago, and George Herman in Washington.
Good evening. The incredible Green Beret murder case, which for weeks has dominated the news with tales of murder, double agents, and cloak and dagger espionage, came to an equally incredible end today. The Army dropped all charges against the 8 men involved. The announcement was made in Washington by Army Secretary Stanley Reeser.
I've been advised today that the Central Intelligence Agency, though not directly involved in the alleged incident, has determined that in the interest of national security, it will not make available any of its personnel as witnesses in connection with the pending trials in Vietnam of Army personnel assigned to the 5th Special Forces Group. It is my judgment that under these circumstances, the defendants cannot receive a fair trial. Accordingly, I have directed today that all charges be dismissed immediately. The men will be assigned to duties outside of Vietnam. While it is not possible to proceed with the trials, I want to make it clear that the acts which were charged but not proven represent a fundamental violation of Army regulations, orders, and principles. The Army will not and cannot condone unlawful acts of the kind alleged.
Influential congressmen and senators had urged the Army to drop the charges, but Secretary Reeser and General Creighton Abrams had been eager to prosecute. President Nixon stayed out of it, but top White House advisors were painfully aware of the growing controversy and were not averse to letting the matter die. The CIA's decision to keep its agents from testifying settled the matter, although it leaves many questions unanswered. Why that agency became involved in the case of Thai Kok Chuyen, other than through regular military channels. Why Chuyen was not turned over to the South Vietnamese Army when his involvement with the enemy was discovered. Whether he was, in fact, secretly serving as a South Vietnamese agent, as well as working for the Green Berets and the North Vietnamese. And perhaps more to the point, whether the case will lead to the destruction of the Special Forces or strengthen them against those in the regular Army who'd like to do away with the Green Berets. Stephen Rowan, CBS News, Washington.
The wife of Colonel Robert Rowe, whose husband once commanded the Green Berets and was one of the accused, was interviewed by reporters as she arrived at her Boston home after hearing the news. Criminal lawyer F. Lee Bailey, who was to have defended one of the men, also was interviewed by WHDH-TV and asked if he was satisfied by the dropping of the charges. First, Bailey.
Yes, I think it's a better result. In the first place, it's a lot more certain than gambling with a military or a civilian jury. And second, I didn't look forward to, and I don't think any other defense lawyer did, the damage that we would have to do to the intelligence network in order to demonstrate why these men did what they did. Because the CIA would have been in a terrible position if the defense had started to put them on the witness stand. I think in addition to that it became apparent that the mainstream of public opinion and certainly military morale were way against the kind of trial that was contemplated. Nobody was in favor of it, that no good could come of it, and the only heroes in the whole business would be the North Vietnamese.
I'm delighted. I'm so happy I can hardly speak.
How did you hear the news, Mrs. Rowe?
I just heard it by accident on the radio.
Did you think it would turn out this way all along?
Oh, I really did. I knew it would. Had to.
Well, what sustained that belief? Why did you feel that way?
Because I have faith in my husband, because I have faith in all the wonderful people in the United States who stuck up for him, all over the United States, everywhere.
What about the letters you've been receiving?
What do you mean, what about them?
Well, have there been many, and what have the comments been? What have people been saying? All right. Has there been any communication from the Army, from the Pentagon?
Not so far. But I'm not home yet. I only learned this 3 minutes ago, and I've got to go home and answer the telephone and find out what communication there has been, if there has been any.
Mrs. Rowe, what do you think this will do to your husband's career? Do you think it'll affect it in any way?
Why don't you ask him?
Do your children know yet, Mrs. Rowe?
No, that's why I want to go up and tell them.
CBS News Saigon Bureau reports tonight that the decision to drop the charges against the Berets leaves the future of General Creighton Abrams in doubt. Abrams had taken a personal interest in the Beret case, and earlier reports had said that he had threatened to resign as U.S. commander in Vietnam if they were not prosecuted.
If you combine the total assets of Standard Oil of New Jersey, General Motors, Ford, Texaco, Gulf, Mobil, IBM, U.S. Steel, General Telephone and Electronics, Standard Oil of California, General Electric, Standard Oil of Indiana, Chrysler, Shell, IT&T, Tenneco, DuPont, Union Carbide, Bethlehem Steel, Phillips Petroleum, Western Electric, Ling Temco Vought, Eastman Kodak, Continental Oil, and Atlantic Richfield. Take the assets of the country's 25 largest industrial corporations and put them all together. You'd still need over $7 billion more to match the assets of savings and loan associations. Where over 44 million people save with profit and safety.
From Vietnam, CBS News correspondent Richard Threlkeld reports that the decision to bring home the U.S. 3rd Marine Division will, in effect, turn over 1/8 of South Vietnam to the Communists. In preparation for that, the few remaining civilians in the area already are being removed. The area is the northwest corner of the country, the jungles bordering Laos and just below the demilitarized zone. Threlkeld points out that the South Vietnamese Army and remaining U.S. troops in the northern part of the country will be too busy defending the heavily populated eastern coastal region, including such cities as Hue, to occupy the basically useless jungles to the west. In the Vietnamese fighting today, there was only minor ground action. The Senate's new Republican leader, Hugh Scott, today appealed for a 60-day halt in criticism of Vietnam policy. He argued that the president needs a breathing spell in order to present a united front to Hanoi and hasten peace negotiations. But some of the best-known critics of the war spurned Scott's appeal. Senator Edward Kennedy, for one, said they have an obligation to voice their objections. The Atomic Energy Commission reported that China exploded a 3-megaton nuclear device early today. The explosion in the Lop Nor area of Xinjiang province in western China is on a par with earlier Chinese nuclear tests, a force equivalent to 3 million tons of TNT. News of the Chinese blast reached a Senate hearing on an underground nuclear test this country plans for Thursday on Amchitka Island off Alaska. 3 scientists joined some members of Congress in opposing that test, arguing that it might cause earthquakes and tidal waves affecting the United States West Coast, Canada, Russia, and Japan. With the ballots in yesterday's elections barely counted, West Germany today moved to end wild international speculation in the mark. We have a report from Bill McLaughlin in Bonn.
The average West German was just as surprised as the rest of the world today to discover that his Deutschmark was suddenly worth much more, perhaps as much as 10% more. In a dramatic move, the lame duck West German government, a coalition of Christian Democrats and Social Democrats, withdrew official control of the mark, allowing it to float freely on the currency market. The solid mark, backed by West Germany's booming economy, is expected to float in only one direction, straight upward. The unofficial revaluation is one of the last important acts of Chancellor Kurt Kiesinger's government. In 3 weeks' time, a new German government will be formed, and Kiesinger is confident that he will keep his job. His Christian Democrats won 46.1% of the vote, a slight loss, but still giving them the biggest block of seats in Parliament. Foreign Minister Willy Brandt and his Social Democrats are no less confident than Kiesinger. Theirs was the only party to make significant gains in the election, emerging with 42.7% of the vote. The Social Democrats have no majority, but then neither have the Christian Democrats. One party has nothing at all, and internationally, this is one of the most important results of the election. The far right-wing National Democratic Party, led by Adolf von Taden, appealing to extreme national sentiment, failed to win enough votes to get into the federal parliament. For the moment, neither Kurt Kiesinger nor Willy Brandt is the most important man in West Germany. Their futures depend on one man and one tiny party which gathered only 5.8% of the vote. If one party wants to rule without the help of the other, it will need the cooperation of Walter Scheel and his Free Democrat Party. It could go either way. Negotiations have begun behind closed doors. They are expected to last some days. In the end, it will be either Chancellor Kiesinger or Chancellor Brandt, depending on which way the Free Democrats go. Bill McLaughlin, CBS News, Bonn.
A third possibility in West Germany's political wheeling and dealing, and one being discounted at this stage, is that the price of free Democratic support for either Kiesinger or Brandt will be too high, and the present coalition will continue. Treasury Secretary David Kennedy described as constructive the decision to allow the mark to respond to supply and demand on the international currency markets. He said the action will not affect the dollar. For the fourth market day in a row, averages were down on the New York Stock Exchange today. The volume 10,170,000 shares. The New York Exchange Index lost 31 cents. The American Index down 9 cents.
You've come a long, long way from days when man was king. Yes, come a long way, baby, to get where you got to today.
This is the Slim cigarette with rich Virginia flavor you'll like. New Virginia Slims.
You've come a long, long way.
And now, folks, we come to the big attraction here in town, McDonald's Big Mac.
We ask you to observe the typical McDonald's touch. 2 patties of 100% beef. And Parents Magazine guarantees that McDonald's hamburgers are 100% beef for your money back. We ask you to observe the generous portions of lettuce and cheese. Happens every time. And we ask you to observe that the impeccable design of Big Mac is in perfect proportion to the shape of the human mouth.
McDonald's is my kind of place.
Almost 200 lawyers appeared in Chicago today to protest the judge's handling of the Democratic Convention violence conspiracy trial, a demonstration arranged by the leftist National Lawyers Guild. Inside the courtroom, defense lawyers also protested. John Lawrence reports.
In the most dramatic decision of the day, Judge Julius Hoffman reversed his contempt ruling against 4 defense attorneys in another session of sharp verbal dueling. The lawyers were allowed to withdraw from the case, indignant about being arrested, promising to continue the fight.
We will plan further legitimate stratagems to bring about the impeachment or forced resignation of Judge Hoffman because he is not fit to sit as a judge in a United States court.
The judge allowed the lawyers to withdraw, saying it is the opinion of this court that the defendants are adequately represented. Chief Defense Attorney William Kunstler launched another critical barrage at the judge. You have degraded, harassed, and maligned these and other attorneys, he charged, in an emergency motion for a mistrial. It is groundless harassment and intimidation by this court. U.S. Attorney Thomas Foran rose to defend the judge. Some of the conduct of counsel for the defendants has been so incredibly unprofessional that it's remarkable that the court has kept as good-natured as it has. We have lawyers conceding that they were participating in publicly discussing the trial before television cameras. This is appalling, appalling conduct. The emergency motion will be denied. The court directs the clerk of the court to impound this document for such consideration as the court may give to it at some future time, during or after this trial. Kunstler, Your Honor, I object to that last statement. There is another intimidation being practiced here upon the attorneys, that we now have to worry about what happens to us for filing the paper. You always have to worry in this courtroom, Mr. Kunstler, when you make remarks or allegations in a document such as you made over your signature. That will be all. John Lawrence, CBS News, Chicago.
A Treasury official told Congress today that the week-old Operation Intercept has been successful because there have been no large seizures of marijuana or other drugs. The man in charge of the crackdown along the Mexican border, Eugene Rosides, said this means that organized narcotic smugglers are lying low. Rosides said that within a year, the operation should cut sharply into the availability of illicit marijuana and other narcotics. He also said the government plans to supply Mexico with airborne sensor devices that can detect marijuana crops growing in remote areas. Attorney General Mitchell today cited individual cases to justify the use of wiretaps and bugging against organized crime. In a speech to the International Association of Chiefs of Police in Miami Beach, Florida, Mitchell said this method has been especially effective in narcotics cases. He said wiretapping led to the seizure of 124 pounds of heroin in New York City and to the arrest of 41 alleged narcotics traffickers in Washington, D.C. Justice Department civil rights lawyers, in rebellion because of the delay of Mississippi school desegregation, today renewed their attack on administration enforcement policies. And the government's chief civil rights enforcer, Assistant Attorney General Jairus Leonard, called a news conference to answer them. George Herman reports.
Shortly before the news conference in the Great Hall of Justice, dissident lawyers gave newsmen copies of their correspondence with Leonard. They attached a memo accusing him of intending to continue a policy of civil rights enforcement they called contrary to law. In his defense, Leonard cited the angry resistance of the affected communities and the lack of federal lawyers and marshals. He said pressing the lawsuits would not have worked.
I think that in hindsight, there isn't any question that that decision to delay was borne out as a sound one. If we would have had the kind of resistance in Mississippi that we saw in certain parts of Louisiana, in the suits we had to bring in Georgia, in Arkansas, in Texas, I doubt sincerely that the resources of this division would have been adequate without a substantial shift away from some other law enforcement activity to handle that situation.
Leonard argued that plans now underway for persuasion and conciliation, plus legal action if needed, would bring about integration successfully by next year. The dissident lawyers called his statement an open invitation to Southern communities to demonstrate raucously against integration, in hopes that the more violent the objection, the more likely the chance of a Justice Department postponement of legal action. They told CBS News the fight for bolder legal action by the department would go on in some form yet to be decided. George Herman, CBS News, Washington.
Cesar Chavez, the leader of the California grape boycott, charged at a Senate hearing today that growers are endangering the health of farm workers by reckless use of pesticides. Daniel Shore reports.
To the immense irritation of grape growers fighting his boycott, Cesar Chavez got a hearing today before a Senate subcommittee on his charges that pesticides may endanger consumers and certainly harm grape pickers.
We find it very, very difficult to stand by idly and continue the systematic poisoning of our people. We feel we must speak out, and we feel that some correction must come soon.
Chavez told a sympathetic Senator Edward Kennedy that the Pentagon has stepped up buying of grapes for Vietnam to beat his boycott.
I don't know what the American taxpayers are paying to send grapes over there, but I know that they're paying a good deal more since your grape strike is being successful.
They're feeding the boys over there about 8 pounds per man. It'll take us 15 years to eat 8 pounds of grapes.
Has that increased?
Yes. And
since November or January of this year, has that increased?
Since I think it was the third quarter of the last fiscal year. And we also see that the grapes are quite an item in the black market, too. We have reports that they're selling for $42 in Saigon. The growers are getting about $3.50 a box for them. We don't know how they're getting there.
What are these California grapes that are going on the black market in Saigon?
We don't know how they're getting there, but they're in the black market.
The grape growers who'll testify tomorrow charge Chavez with a false pesticide scare to sustain what they call a sagging grape boycott. Daniel Shore, CBS News, Washington.
Chavez's farm workers also charge that grapes contaminated by pesticides are reaching consumers through supermarkets. They presented a laboratory report on grapes bought in Washington to support their claim. But the Food and Drug Administration challenged this, saying its tests in Washington and elsewhere showed no harmful amounts of pesticides. In Madison, Wisconsin today, welfare demonstrators forcibly occupied the state capitol for a time. Led by the activist Catholic priest, Father James Groppe, and supported by about 1,000 university students, they broke through a locked door of the assembly chamber. They ejected a sympathetic assemblyman who cautioned against going too far in their protest against welfare cuts. Later, however, they moved aside to let the assemblyman enter and adjourn. Mary Jo Kopechne's parents again went to court today to bar an autopsy on their daughter's body found in Senator Kennedy's submerged car last July. The Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania judge said he would rule on their plea forthwith, but no date was given. The district attorney for Martha's Vineyard is seeking the autopsy as part of his inquest into Miss Kopechne's death.
When you've been the leader as long as Prestone, you have to keep moving to hold the lead. Prestone holds the lead with year-round protection. Prestone antifreeze protects against rust, against freeze-ups, against warm day boil-over. And now its exclusive anti-leak formula protects against leaks. So get the winner. Get Prestone in can or jug. We keep moving so your car will.
These are killers. Battery killers. Their weapons, flashlights and toys. So Everready created a battery that's harder to kill. The new Everready Super 99 gives twice the energy of ordinary batteries in the standard heavy-duty test for only a few pennies more. Super 99, the battery that doesn't know when to quit. That's power to spare from the Everready powerhouse. Ever-ready. When you want a battery that's not.
3 men and their wives arrived in Mexico City today, the first stop on a 38-day tour of 24 nations. Now, that sounds like the kind of crowded itinerary you, I, or great Aunt Agnes might take on an economy package tour. And even after 800,000-mile round trip to the moon, it was, though, a festive occasion for the travelers. George Nathanson reports.
Diplomatic protocol and polite applause at the airport soon gave way to an emotional outpouring of enthusiasm unprecedented in Mexico City. All normal activity was practically brought to a standstill as an estimated 125,000 Mexicans expressed their admiration for the 3 U.S. space heroes. At City Hall, it was cheers, kisses, and the keys to the city as the man who had conquered the moon completed their conquest of Mexico.
And we particularly remember an occasion where we were viewing this country 128,000 miles away. And we could see no boundaries between our countries. We could only see our hemisphere. Its continents joined in a manner fitting to the way that our people have been joined over the years.
Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir completed talks with Washington officials today. It was reported in a Tel Aviv newspaper and on Israeli radio that Mrs. Meir, in her meetings with President Nixon, had asked for $1 billion in economic aid for her country over the next 5 years.
Gentlemen, what you're about to see is an entirely new car idea. The American Motors Hornet. Notice that although the Hornet is little, it is by no means humble. It was designed to prove that a small car can have the luxuries of a big car. How much will it cost? Actually, the Hornet lists for $1994, but it offers so many luxury options you can work your way up to about $3,600.
Well, then who will the Hornet appeal to?
Appeal to? I'll tell you who will appeal to. To the somebodies of America and to the nobodies. to the big shot in the bank, to the soda jerk in the corner drugstore. It's Father Kelly, the Joneses, the Robinsons. It's Father
Former Vice President Humphrey charged today that the Nixon administration, in his words, is close to failure. Campaigning in Massachusetts for a Democratic congressional candidate, Humphrey said the administration had done very poorly in its first 9 months and has forgotten the people it said it would remember. Eric Severide has some thoughts tonight on Mr. Nixon's presidency. Eric?
According to the familiar French proverb, the more things change, the more they remain the same. This is not eternally and universally true, but often enough. And this particular moment seems to be one of those times. The mood and talk in this capital have become strongly reminiscent of the mood and talk in the Johnson administration before the spring of '68. Then, too, critics of the Vietnam War are being told that they were the real obstacle to peace, not the communist enemy, and that if they would just stay quiet, the prevailing policies and strategies would bring the long-sought peace. Today, the Senate Republican leader, Mr. Scott, begged the critics to give President Nixon a 60-day moratorium. No more protests, to show Hanoi that Americans are not gravely divided on war policy. In its timing, this seemed an astonishing request to many people here. As far as congressmen, if not students, are concerned, Mr. Nixon has enjoyed an 8-month moratorium already. A number of normally cautious congressmen are now joining in the demands for a faster troop withdrawal because their constituents are gravely divided, with the balance shifting toward the protesters' side. There's another respect in which the Capitol's mood and talk are reminiscent of 2 and 3 years ago. Then the titanic and paradoxical personality of Lyndon Johnson dominated every other private conversation in offices, corridors, carpools, or dinner parties. He was subjected to endless, if amateur, psychoanalysis. This is now happening in respect to Mr. Nixon. Few people seem sure just what his basic political philosophy is, or what vision of what America should be like exists in his mind, besides the normal hope for domestic tranquility. Along with this debate is the puzzled argument over his tactics and strategies. Life magazine's perceptive Hugh Sidey observes that Nixon's programs have been slightly to the left of center, his appointments slightly to the right. Which will predominate in the end is the question. Some presidential intimates argue that he has been paying off very real political debts to the conservatives and the Southerners, but that as time passes and elections near, he will sound and act more and more liberal. Whatever the prognosis, the diagnosis is of patching, fitting, and finessing, not of bold courses or drastic surgery. One Republican senator puts it this way: John Kennedy, also elected by a slight margin, also patched and finessed, but his hand was soon forced by the concurrent humiliations of the Bay of Pigs and the Russians' first space orbit of the Earth. Then, says the senator, the presidency was born in on Kennedy, and he began to be president. So far, this senator concludes, the presidency has not borne in on Richard Nixon. Walter?
This is Walter Cronkite. Good night.